After 15 days of the Kursk offensive and entering the Kursk region, the Ukrainian forces have taken a significant, not small, area. The fighting is still ongoing, and some observations can be made. The attack on Kursk is merely a demonstrative attack, similar to the one the Russian side carried out at the beginning of the special military operation when they reached Kiev. When the reasons for the demonstrative attack disappeared, the Russians withdrew but managed to capture a considerable amount of territory in southeastern Ukraine. The greatest potential success for the Ukrainian forces would have been capturing the Kursk nuclear power plant, but they did not succeed. According to various sources, the size of the captured territory ranges from 400 to 600 square kilometers, although some estimates mention up to 1,000 square kilometers. It has also become apparent that the Russians cannot quickly expel the Ukrainians from the Kursk region. However, the history of warfare in Eastern Europe shows that territory is not defended to the last man, as was crucial in World War I between Germany and France. When necessary, Russia allowed Napoleon to enter Moscow or Hitler to approach Moscow, but did not let them defeat Russia. This means that for the Russians, this is a normal way of warfare, where they wait for the Ukrainians to tire out before launching their own offensive. The Russian president's statement indicates that Kiev has rejected peace plan proposals and is trying to improve its negotiating position with the help of the West. What can be concluded is that negotiations of some sort have been ongoing all this time, either secretly or through messages sent via various intermediaries. Putin's reaction suggests that this is leading to further radicalization of the conflict, and that Ukraine and Russia are now even further from the negotiating table. The most significant success of the Ukrainian offensive has been the capture of the Sudzha gas pumping station. A substantial amount of gas transits through this station. Although there has been military activity in the area, the station is still operational. However, the station's importance to Russia is minimal because the gas flowing through it goes entirely into Ukraine. If it were gas going to Belarus or Turkey, that would be a different story. Interrupting gas supplies to Hungary and Slovakia at the beginning of winter will be more severe than in the middle of summer. Austria will suffer more because it has no alternative to Russian gas in this supply segment. Ukrainian propaganda is likely preparing a powerful narrative in which Russian targeted attacks on the station would leave unfortunate Austrian children freezing. For Russia, cutting the pipeline does not cause critical financial losses, except in terms of reputation. The only important thing for the Russians is to be careful because the Ukrainian army can now thoroughly entrench itself in the area, exposing the gas pipeline to Russian bombs. The Ukrainian army did not achieve another goal of the offensive, drawing Russian forces from Ukraine to the Kursk front. If it is impossible to capture the nuclear power plant, at least force the Russians to withdraw reserves, or even combat units, from the fronts to help. The idea is rather half-baked, especially when there is no strength to strike in another direction. The town of Sudzha was supposed to become a red flag, throwing the Russian military political leadership off balance. Russian military equipment columns would march in organized lines, and the MRs would attack them. Or they would be burned by MRLs from ambushes. None of that happened. Instead of pulling forces from Ukraine, the Russians began bringing in forces from the Baltics, Kaliningrad, the Moscow region, Grozny, and the Far East, while the units in Ukraine were left untouched. Meanwhile, the Russians have increased pressure on Donbass, capturing more and more settlements. The Russian forces' operation in Donbass follows this tactical sequence. First, fortified areas are destroyed using heavy weaponry, FAB, guided missiles, MRLs, TOS, etc., followed by an infantry assault on the remaining targets with the support of drones and armored vehicles. If this does not yield results, the aforementioned heavy munitions are used again on the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. Simultaneously, most civilians are evacuated from the front line before the general assault begins. This approach allows the Russians to avoid unnecessary civilian and own troop casualties, and significantly increases the loss rate in the Ukrainian armed forces. The downside is villages that are practically wiped off the map. The point is not that the Russians are destroying everything in their path, but that the Ukrainian forces use every house as a stronghold. The Ukrainian army is currently halted in the Kursk region, but that does not mean they are completely defeated. They are actively preparing for defense, utilizing the skills they have honed since 2014. The most significant Ukrainian success is demonstrating to the world that they can enter Russia. This way, they show that the Russians are vulnerable and that the Ukrainians can capture territory in a few days, whereas it takes the Russians months in Donbass. However, given the overwhelming superiority in equipment and manpower, the Russian military command may attempt to enter the Sumy region from two directions and simply encircle the territory. The Ukrainians will be forced either to leave with losses through a designated corridor, surrender, or remain in Kursk indefinitely. And finally, after the Ukrainian army's breakthrough into the Kursk region, Russia will have to maintain significant forces along the entire border with Ukraine, in the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod regions. Otherwise, the Ukrainian armed forces will not limit themselves to just one August offensive. Blocking the border with Ukraine will require a lot of forces, resources, and manpower, but these steps cannot be avoided. The Russian army will not only close hundreds of kilometers of the border, but will also force the Ukrainian armed forces to keep at least as many, if not more,